This is the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast from Advanta IRA, where we show you how to explore investments beyond Wall Street and open your eyes to new options for your portfolio. It's time to take control and give yourself the freedom to choose where you invest your money.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. As always, my name is Alex Perny. Very happy to have everyone on with us today, and we are very pleased to welcome on Greg Mohr, the owner of franchise Maven. Now, we have had a couple different guests on the podcast talking about franchising, which again, I find is a very fascinating topic to delve into. There's so much more to it than just kind of driving by, things that we all associate with franchises, right? Your big golden arches or, a lot of food establishments, but there are so many different other opportunities in the franchising space, whether you're someone that's looking to have something that has a lot of support for a business that you would like to own, if you're entrepreneurial, but you would like to have, that kind of support structure that comes in with business planning, projections, and things like that. There's also, again, a lot that goes into that, but something that we haven't discussed on this podcast with any of our guests has been kind of the angle of people looking to, start a franchise. It's easy to say, hey, I'd like to go out and acquire one, or hey, I'd like to own a franchise. But let's say you have a great, business idea. And I'm actually seeing one locally here. There's a coffee shop that's starting to do a franchising model. Actually, personally knew the owner, back when they had their first location. They're starting to do some franchising with that. But we haven't really looked at, what does that progression look like? If you're a business owner and you have something that would be well served by a franchise model, how do you kind of make that step into becoming a franchise, not just, going out and acquiring one? We'll cover a lot of other small and very salient nuggets to that as well. So Greg, again, thank you very much for being on with us today. If you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of background about yourself and how you kind of came to be in your current position with franchises.
Thank you for having me, Alex. I appreciate it. So we'll keep it short, but go back into the Wayback Machine is how I got my first start in franchising. That was back in high school. We all had to get a job somewhere, and most of us back in my day got a job at fast food, and mine just happened to be Taco Bell. And I worked my way up in the Taco Bell world and started managing restaurants for this lady named Kathy. And turned out she was a master franchiser for Taco Bell, had about 50 Taco Bells throughout the Sacramento, California area. And I went into her different establishments and helped her build up her teams and build up her revenue in each one of the locations. I went on after that to manage another restaurant for a while, did restaurant management for 15 years, got a degree in electrical engineering and physics, became a semiconductor engineer, microelectronic circuit engineer. Did that for about 15 years, bought dry cleaners with a friend of mine, dry cleaners, privately owned business with that while we were working, and bought storage units, had a couple of rental properties that I bought. But read Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and realized at that point in time, it is time to get out of the employment world. So I sold off all my half of my shares of the company that I was working with to my friend who was also doing it. We were doing it as partners. And I decided it was time to get out and get a business for myself. I enjoyed that franchising thing quite a bit when I was at Taco Bell and thought, let's go look into that. I don't have the latest, greatest idea on that. So I want to step into a business that's basically a business in a box. So I searched around for many different franchises, finally got a hold of a franchise consultant who knew they existed. I certainly did not. He helped me find a great franchise system that I got into, a Schooley Mitchell telecommunications consulting franchise. And Dennis Schooley, outstanding individual, really set the stage for how well franchisors teach you how to do what they do and show you how to do it. So I did that for a couple of years, but realized that, I was doing a lot of driving around talking to business owners, which was nice. It was a whole lot of fun, much better than the corporate world. But I didn't like driving around, and I was talking to that franchise consultant that was helping me out, and he got to work from home. And I said, I like that. I don't want to have to drive around all over the place. Teach me what you do. So it was 10, 12 years ago, and I sold off my Schooley Mitchell franchise and got into franchise consulting and haven't looked back since.
Fantastic. That's a great kind of trajectory into kind of coming full circle with experience of franchises. And another thing too, I've had some personal experience in franchising. My dad for a long time growing up was a real estate advertising executive for a print real estate advertiser for in that space, and it was a franchised business model, Homes and Land Publishing. Unfortunately, the print aspect of a lot of things in life has kind of gone by the wayside. But it was interesting to see that not everything, it doesn't just have to be your Taco Bells, your McDonald's, your Wendy's that are franchised. It can be real estate publishing. It can be anything to your effect as well, where it's not just kind of those singular things that we're used to. So, one thing I'd like to maybe discuss a little bit, because I think it kind of bears some interest in it, is you've certainly been in this for a very long time, which is awesome, because it allows us to kind of look back and see kind of what was going on then versus now and how things evolve, right? It's all well and good to be successful in the present day, but continued success is built on past experience, is a big kind of thought that I've always had. So, what are some things that maybe have, changed in the world of franchising from when you initially got exposed to that master franchisor with Taco Bell's to now? Do you feel like the market has, gained in some ways and maybe retracted in others? Maybe some positive, negative comparisons between where you started and kind of where it is now.
Yeah, great question, Alex. So when I first started, there was a big thing for brick and mortar. People liked a lot of brick and mortar ones. Really, when I first started back in there, a little while after that, the yogurt shops really took off there for a while. Everybody wanted the yogurt thing, and then we had a big pizza push there for a while. So I was probably putting people into a lot of the brick and mortars on that. But as it turns out, the yogurt shops didn't work out so well. There was way too many of them building up way too fast. So that's one thing as part of the negative aspect to look at is, what's the sustainability of whatever franchise system you get into and whatever industry you get into as well. As it turned out that there was a lot of yogurt, a lot of frozen food, frozen dessert type ones that are really taking off, really doing well to begin with, but then they started failing and people weren't making the kind of money that they hoped they'd make. And my funding people actually told me at one point in time, do not bring us any more of those frozen desserts or yogurt shops. There's too many of them failing. We're not gonna fund those anymore. So you have to be real careful and don't just necessarily go after what's popular or what's in fashion at the time. So I think that's the biggest thing I took away from that is be careful about the industry and the franchise in particular, and what's their long-term goal, what's their long-term strategy for being appealing to customers on that. So recently, especially in the last probably 4 or 5 years, it's been a big shift towards more essential type service businesses that you get into, which are a lot less of an investment, but they're things that people need all the time. I mean, we're in the middle of winter here, so if you're in the north, you got to have your heating. Obviously, it's just, no matter what, if something breaks, you got to have your house heated. You're in the south. When I lived in Texas for 20 years, air conditioning. I mean, I had one of those home services businesses that, you give them $50 a month, and whenever you have something break, it's real cool because then you save a lot of money. You just call them up and say, hey, this broke, come and fix it. Well, they always took 2 days to get somebody out there to do it. So some of the things that broke, plumbing, things like that, little things, you could wait 2 days. Air conditioning? No, I never waited 2 days. I never called them for air conditioning. I paid full price for that because I was in Texas, it was 100 degrees out there, and I'm not going to wait. So those kind of things, those essential services that people need, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, restoration services, senior care, great one there. You always, always going to be in need, always in demand. Tutoring, those are the things. And those are the sort of things that I see people more gravitating towards more these days over the last 4 or 5 years is the more essential type services that are needed on a regular basis. And if you really want to make certain that, you're not, or you want to reduce your risk as much as possible, look for the ones that have been around for a while that have a little bit of a track record there. That's what my people have been really looking for. They say they wanted something that, that's got a 10-year track record, a 5-year track record. There are still a few people that I'll work with that'll go for emerging brands like that. But these days, not quite as many as what it used to be. Most of them are looking for something a little bit more established. But, I still get, interesting enough, I still get quite a few people that want to go with something that's emerging, want to be part of that emerging system, and want to help develop that franchise system.
Yeah, and I think that kind of, again, leads into kind of the basic, principle of, investment is that, the earlier adopters have greater risk. There's less track record, but the potential for reward is much greater. So your initial upfront cost might be cheaper because there's not a proven track record for valuating, that particular market segment. And your opportunity to get that 10x multiple is there. Whereas if something is matured and there's a lot of players in the space, then your returns are going to be again reduced. But as you reduce that edge on you know potential returns, you gain in potential security of the investment. So that's again, it's always nice to be able to come full circle to some very basic principles when we're talking to any investment, whether it be new or old to someone. Again, fundamental principles remain fundamental principles, which is a good thing in today's world. And again, to your point about home services, I had exposure to a really interesting one, personally with some clients, and I've spoken at their conference, but crime scene cleanup, which I never thought would be a franchise model for something. Spalding Decontamination. I've worked with them and actually spoken at their annual conference. But again, I would have thought of that. People going and cleaning up meth labs and murder scenes would have been something that you can franchise. But sure enough, and the woman, Laura, that runs that whole program, got her start as a police officer. Then she asked the homeowner that showed up, it's like, so who comes in and cleans this stuff up? And they were like, I don't know, someone. And she was like, oh, someone come clean this up. Well, who's going to want to buy a meth contaminated property? I bet I could get it for pennies on the dollar. Okay, well, now I know how to clean it up. I can fully remediate this thing, and I bought it for 20% of its total, after repair value. Again, just you find money in the margins with these things, and now she's wildly successful. I encourage anyone listening, look up Spalding Decontamination or crime scene cleaners on YouTube. Not something to watch right before you eat lunch, but fascinating. I found myself watching it a ton, and actually I watched her before I knew of it, and then the rest was history. But it's fascinating stuff. So again, the home service thing, again, I find very interesting. But you kind of mentioned a few things, and I kind of like to pivot a little bit into the topic of discussion here on people, again, that kind of have that idea and transitioning into it. So the first question I kind of had is that again, it's great to have that idea, but like you mentioned with yogurt shops, everyone probably thought they had the next, in on being the next yogurt shop, whether it's TCBY, that's the one we had in Tallahassee where I grew up in Florida. But, it's how do you kind of, look at it from the perspective of saying, hey, I want to start this. And, franchising has a lot of required disclosures when you go in and buy one, of market analysis, what things are going to do. So if you're going in new, you miss that. And again, that's part of the risk and reward. So, if someone has an idea and they come to you and say, hey, look, I'd like to start franchising this, I think it could be really good. How are some ways to kind of, initially avoid, or maybe let's start here. What is kind of the first conversation you have with someone? They come to you and say, hey, Greg, I think this would be a good thing to franchise. Where do you go from there?
Well, first off, I'd ask them a few questions. There are basically three things that we look at. So if you want a franchise, what you're going to be looking at is how well you can attract people to your franchise. Okay, who's going to be interested in your franchise? More the merrier on that one. So the first thing you want to look at is when people are thinking about getting involved in a franchise, they're generally looking for a good income. Not all franchisers are like this, but somewhere around a six-figure income is a good one. If you show that you're netting, a good six-figure income on that, that's a good start. That'll attract more people on that. It's not absolute. These things are not set in stone. They're not absolute, but a good six-figure income is a good place to start on that. That will attract more people to you. The second thing is your product or your services. How many people in how many different cities and states can use that product or service? The more the merrier. Now, again, not set in stone. We have boat franchises out there where, obviously there's not a body of water nearby every single city and state in the U.S. So they do still do good because there's enough of them out there that they can on that one. And then what I'll ask them, have you reproduced it? People like to see that you've shown that you can put up another location somewhere else and get it up and running. Within the same city is fine. If you've done it in another city or state, that's even better. Most of the new franchises are probably going to be the newest locations, going to be semi-close to them. Not a whole lot of them are going to open up too far away because they're using their own money and they have to oversee it. But those are the three things that I'm going to talk to them about is, what's your net? What's the product or service? How many people can use it? And have you reproduced it yet?
Yeah, and those are, again, things that I would think would be, relatively common, questions or things that you should probably be thinking about. But I would imagine it probably goes a little bit deeper than that. Again, reproducing. Okay, let's pick on restaurants for example, because it's easy for any city of an appreciable size. You have one over here, but people on this side of town don't want to drive, so you have one over there. It does well. But again, at least with food, it can be very regional, right? Your your southern barbecue place may not translate well to Seattle, right? Which again, I don't know why. Again, barbecue down here is great. Seattle needs to get on board. Again, I'm sure they probably have great barbecue in Seattle. I don't know. But again, just to the kind of point of, people have this grand idea of saying, hey, look, like this, market segment works, right? Like I can do it here in Tampa, Florida, or I can do this here in Buffalo, New York. But, when it comes to that, what are some kind of cracks in the armor that you might kind of identify for them of saying, hey, look, like, yeah, you've opened up a few locations. Hey, look, you're, let's say, hey, even in food, let's say you're running a profit. This is awesome, right? Food being historically very thin margins, but if you can replicate that. But maybe what are some things that people kind of miss when it comes to saying, hey, look, I have that, revenue stream. I have that replication that you mentioned. Again, where are some kind of things that you say, hey, look, but you're kind of missing on this point?
Well, once you start, I would say if you're going to do that and you're going to expand out, you probably want to expand out. And if you want a franchise, you want to do it somewhat more local to begin with on that, because you haven't actually gone into the different markets on there. So you, depending on what you do, you want to expand out in your state first as much as possible, and then adjoining states. Because then you're thinking about maybe, some delivery of products. Where are your products, if you're doing products, your delivery of products, where are they coming from? Who are your distributors out there? Where are they distributing to? Some of the franchises that I start with, they won't go too far out of their general area to begin with because of the distribution routes. They haven't distributed in that state or that far away yet. So think about how far you have to go. Now, if it's a service, it's probably not as necessary to think about that sort of thing again. But if it's a product, that is definitely something you want to think about. I've had people start in the north and they say, we're not ready to go, south of this line yet because we don't know how the distribution is going to be or what it's going to cost us to do that. So those are some of the things you need to think about as you go into franchising on that one. Service industry, probably not quite so much. I mean, if you do home inspections or something like that, pretty much a home is going to be the same thing all over the place. But keep in mind, you're going to want to have some oversight into whatever franchises that you start opening up out there. So having some oversight means you probably want to go visit them every once in a while. So how far do you really want to go to begin with? If you're up in New York and your first franchise is down in Arizona, that might be a bit of a challenge for you to get out there on a regular basis and make certain that they're running correctly, especially when the newer ones, you really want the newer ones, you want all of them, but you want the newer ones to start out real good, because as other franchisees or other potential franchisees start looking at your business on that, they are going to want to talk to other franchisees. So if you keep them a little bit closer together, you have more oversight with them. So think about the travel that you might have to do to go look at them. So distribution routes you need to look at for product on that, and services, both of them. How far do you have to drive? Start kind of local and expand out from there so that you have better oversight.
Yeah, and exactly. And depending on what the actual business is, it may not necessarily be something where you can have it be immediately local, right? If it's depending on the market, especially for like home inspections, right? Let's say you started in a smaller market, it's you don't need to have 5 franchisees just in St. Petersburg, Florida. You might have 2, and then okay, well, we need to go another hour away to maybe Tampa, and then another hour and a half away to Lakeland, and then once you start getting to those cities and markets, like now all of a sudden you have 5, 7, 8 hour drives to everything. So again, depending on the market segment, is something to definitely look at from that perspective as well. Not everything kind of keeps that locality for you to be able to kind of closely monitor and coordinate with people. Granted, technology has certainly helped with that. It's super easy for people to get on and have checkups with a video call. But again, some things might necessitate boots on the ground. For something that has warehousing, if you have capital equipment, and stuff like that, you need to go say, hey, look, like, is this thing actually running? Is the oven on? Right? To check and see if these things are actually occurring and to what level and degree of efficiency things are running, might necessitate that. So again, these are all really kind of good things that I think are important to look at that people may not necessarily think about when just going in that. The next thing I think I kind of want to explore really is the what is kind of given up by people. It's when you own a business outright, hoof to horns, you have that whole vertical stack of what you're responsible for. And granted, you hire people. It's not just a one person shop, I should say, for anything. You're not doing the hiring, the cleaning, and everything, but you have control over all of that. But when you start doing franchising, inherently there is a you're giving up part of that. You're giving over your kind of child that you've helped build and develop over to other people to run and operate that have a vested ownership interest in that and how it runs. So, from the point that people kind of identify, okay, this is a workable model, I'm comfortable with, my parameters of distribution, we have kind of an initial primer of things working. I think that the next step really is, okay, well, let's start putting the paperwork together. And what is kind of that process look like for, again, for someone that has this model for that kind of first outward franchise? What are the steps in that kind of process, and what do they give up, and what do they make?
Yeah, what you're looking at there, Alex, is that as a business owner, you're going to have a completely different role once you step into the world of franchising on that. So before, when you're doing corporate locations, and if you do multiple corporate locations, you're still overseeing operations on all of those. That's yours. You might have some managers in those places on that, but that whole thing is your business to operate. When you step into the world of franchising, you're stepping out of that role. Now you're mentoring all those different franchisees. You're helping those franchisees grow their businesses. So you have to generally step away from your previous role as pretty much the operations manager, if you will, for all of your locations or your one locations, if you will. And now you've got to oversee the development on the different franchises that you have out there and oversee their progress, each individual franchisee's progress on that. So it's going to be something that you have not necessarily done before in your previous role as building up your business itself. You're going to help other people build up their businesses. So you're going to be in a lot of people development. You're going to be doing a lot of mentorship on that. So you have to be ready for something like that, to do that sort of thing. It's a big change for people to get into a different role like that.
Sure. And I would imagine that that's probably kind of the bigger thing for people to get their heads around. What are some, again, like, yeah, I'm sure you've probably seen the whole spectrum of people that, gravitate and they make that change very easily. But I imagine a lot of people, especially, you've built this and you've put all of your, blood, sweat, and tears, as they say, into this, business to, again, kind of grow it to the point where it could be franchised. What are some kind of hangups that people have when it comes to transitioning? Because I'd imagine there's probably some, like, when you give up control, like a lot of times when people own a business, giving up control is one of the harder things for them to do.
You really do when you're getting into having somebody else run it. There's two different ways to grow your business. You do it yourself, and then you have complete control over everything. You use your money to do it. You get all the money. Everything's good there, but you've got a lot of different businesses to oversee. And you grow linearly. Once you step into the world of franchising, it's more exponential growth. So now you've got to let go of what you're doing there with the operations and have somebody else do that. If you're going to keep those corporate locations and keep those corporate locations running, you're going to want somebody else to take care of that. And that's a big challenge because it was your baby. You grew that baby up from scratch and you built it up to where it is. And you really have to let go of that and start hiring some other people on that and turning over some of the responsibilities of simple operations to other folks while you help grow and develop other franchisees on there. And you've got to give the other franchisees some leeway. You're going to give them all the directions, all the processes and procedures. That's why people get into franchising, because you've got that step-by-step process. But you've got to help them go through that process and make certain that they are following your processes and procedures on each individual franchisee. And the more you have, the more different people that you're going to be working with and really letting them have quite a bit of control. People think that it's buying a job as a franchisee, but it's really not. You still have to get up in the morning. You still have a lot of creativity to do it. You follow the process and procedures, never wondering what to do next. But you do have that franchisor to look to if there's any issues. And as a franchisor, you've got to be there for every single one of those franchisees that are growing up, and you can't be busy doing something else if those franchisees need you for something, you've got to be available for that. So it is a big challenge. And I've seen, franchisors when they first started out, they'll actually go out and they would visit with every single new franchisee that's coming on there because they wanted to have a 100% role in picking out every single new franchisee. Well, that may work out, for the first, 5 or 10. But after a while, you're going to start growing too much, and you're going to have to step back from that. You can't go out flying out to every single, city and state to ensure that that's the perfect franchisee for you. You need to have another system or process in place where other people are helping you to determine and filtering out some of those new people that are potential franchisees for you, and then to wait till the very end after your people have done the filtering and filled them in how the franchise system works, and then meet with you last, and then you have the final say in that. So it's one of the biggest things that I see with the new franchisees. Franchisors, they always want to meet with all the new franchisees and kind of go one-on-one with them a little too early in the process. You want to hold back on that, hire the team, get the people in place to help you, build, let that franchisee know, take them through the process of a potential franchisee, take them through the process, let them know what's expected of them, what it's all about, and you step in at the very end to do the yay or nay as far as whether or not that will be a good franchisee. And that's the type of person you want as part of your franchise system, which of course leads to the next thing is that if you're going to become a franchisor, you really have to know and have a really good idea up front, who do you want as a franchisee? Anybody that just has the money for it and has got some business background? Or is there specific things that you're looking for in a particular franchisee? You really have to have that set. It's a good idea to have that set before you go into developing your franchise system.
Well, that's a good thing to point out too, is that, before you kind of start, trying to multiply and replicate this, sit down and have a realistic expectation of what your ideal avatar spectrum looks like for your franchisee, right? It's all well and good to say, hey, look, we'd like to really kind of grow this thing, but every person that walks through the door is not going to necessarily be a good fit. And having, kind of an established procedure, and what I like about franchising is there's a lot of there's a lot of science behind it, and a lot of, like 1, 2, 3 of kind of the delineation of saying, okay, like here's how we can qualify things for this certain business. And again, franchising having been around for so long, you can look to other things to draw some corollaries and help you kind of through that process, which I'm sure is what you do with your clients as well, of saying, hey, look, like for this industry, here's kind of the person that has worked well or maybe hasn't, and we can kind of help to build those things in place. Now, from that perspective, again, okay, you have this idea, we've done through the replication, we've, kind of identified this as good, we have, some policies and procedures in place, but, franchising is a very heavily regulated market. So making that jump to be able to say, hey, look, it's all well and good to say, hey, look, I'd like to franchise this, and everything is kind of behind that, but you can't just kind of put a, poster on an intersection or put a, Facebook ad up and say, hey, look, you want to get in a restaurant franchise, call me today for the low price of this. What does the process look like from a legal perspective? Like, how long does that process take? What are some kind of hidden costs and pitfalls that people maybe aren't aware of? Because again, most of these people understand their business really well, but this is a fundamental change to that business, and there's a whole other component that's going to come in and kind of be sitting on top of this as a franchise model.
Yeah, great question, Alex. So a general rule of thumb, if you want to become a franchise, turn your business into a franchise, you're probably looking at around $50,000 for the paperwork. Simple as that for that one. Franchising is very transparent, which is one of the good things about it. So what the people will do, what my people do for you for that $50,000 is that they create all your procedures, processes manual, your franchise disclosure documents, and then, which is in time-wise, you asked a time question, probably not too long, actually, 2 to 3 months. They can usually get that done in. It just depends on how proactive you are with that. I've helped turn a couple businesses into franchise. One was fairly quick. The other one took a little while longer because the person that was doing it didn't come up with the necessary paperwork right away, wasn't interacting quite as quickly as they could have. But, that's up to you, depending how fast or slow you want to go. So 2 to 3 months, you can usually get it up there. So you got that franchise disclosure document with you. And that one is pretty in depth on there. So things that they're going to be looking at to put in there is some background information on you as a franchisor. What do you look like? Because people want to know, who are you? Do you have any bankruptcies? Do you have any litigation on there? What's your background story? What's your background in the franchising world, in the business world itself? All that things are going to be in there as well on that. Things for you to consider, or are you going to be doing any financial disclosures on there? If you want to tell people how much your locations are making, you have to put that in the franchise disclosure documents. You can't tell people anything that you do not put in those franchise disclosure documents on that. So that is by law on that one. So, I get asked a lot, how much can I make if I get into this franchise? Like, I can't tell you. Federal Trade Commission rules. They're not going to throw me in jail, but I'll probably won't be working with any franchisers anymore because they won't like me. But that's what you have to think about when you put those franchise disclosure documents together, is, are you going to put any earnings claims in there? If you are, those are the things you can talk about. That's why it's nice and transparent. You'll also have a list of franchisees that are currently operating the business. If you're just starting out, you may not have any at the time, or you won't have any at the time because you're not a franchise. You'll just have the corporate locations that you can put in there. At that point in time, there's probably about a dozen states that you can start offering your franchise in right away. So the non-registration states out there. Now you got to take a look at the different registration states. Different registration states are going to cost you a little bit more to get into because there's a little bit more rules and regulations within each one of those states. So you have to think about, which one of the states do you want to go into, and then do you want to pay that fee on a regular basis. And then another thing to consider is those franchise disclosure documents. Those are usually updated every year or so. So that's an added cost. I'm not too sure how much that one is on that, probably just a couple $1,000. But don't take my word for that. That's not really too much, but you do have to go through them and re-register in quite a few of those states for you to think about. So those are some of the things when you're just getting started and just getting into a franchise. Once you've got that franchise disclosure document done, you can start doing the non-registration states right away. And quite often, many franchisors will start with just that, depending on where they're located on there, and go from there. If you're located in California, that is a registration state. So if you want to sell in California, then you got to be registered there right away on that one. But otherwise, non-registration states are good. So overall, $50,000, 2 or 3 months, and you're pretty much good to go. Now you just have to think about how and where and what am I going to do to attract people to me, and how am I going to help get my word out that I've got a franchise system that's ready to go. Who's going to help me sell?
Absolutely. And from that point, again, it's again, that's kind of a big fundamental change, because now you have regulation from not only, again, the states that you operate in, and depending on what industry that is, that's going to be a whole litany list of other things. You're not going to, people that deal in crime scene cleanup are going to have to deal with things like the EPA and other things for what they do. And, if you're doing again, kind of like maybe like a massage envy or something, you don't have to deal with those different kind of things. So, but now, everything you're going to take on another regulatory body, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, for what you're doing. So, are there any kind of big, like, high level things that people have to understand that you have to abide by? Again, certain different states are going to have different things. Again, you mentioned non-registration states, so meaning like once you get the initial federal approval for what you're doing, they kind of stamp the doc, say, hey, look, good to go, have fun, make money. Different states may require additional registration, but past that, what are some big high-level things that people maybe don't realize go into having a franchise model?
2 things on that, Alex. One, whatever you tell people, and whatever your franchise development tell your potential franchisees, they have to be listed in the franchise disclosure documents or the franchise agreement on there. You can't talk about anything that would influence somebody to get into that franchise that's not in those documents itself. Because in the franchise agreement, there should be, that says, nobody's promised you anything else that is not listed specifically in these documents. Nobody's promised you that you can do anything besides what's already listed in these agreements on there. So there are pretty in-depth as far as what you can say and what you can't say as a franchise development person and a franchisor listed in the Federal Trade Commission. Most of it would be pretty obvious to most people on there. You can't tell them that, you'll have $100,000 net profit by the end of the year if you work with ours. Well, You don't know that for certain. Even if your people are already doing that, you don't know that for certain because you don't know if that franchisee is going to get up in the morning on there. So you've got to be real careful about some of the things you say on there and just be aware of the different rules and regulations. I'm probably not even aware of all the rules and regulations in there. So I limit what I tell people on a regular basis. I generally give them a kind of a general overview of the franchise when I'm working with them, and I say the franchise development people will go into the specifics as far as how they operate and what they do on that. But you just need to be very aware of the fact that there are rules and regulations with the Federal Trade Commission that you'll have to comply with those on a regular basis. But overall, most of it, I would say, is probably fairly obvious to most people on that. And it's mostly about honesty and integrity on that. And that's where working with a franchise, for the most part, I mean, there's probably some franchises out there that probably aren't, as honest and doesn't have the integrity that they should. But for the most part, most franchises are out there. Probably 99% of them are out there. So just be aware of the regulations involved and what you can and what you cannot say to potential franchisees.
Yeah, and from that perspective, again, it's things that would seem relatively obvious, but are there kind of any things that might have changed over the years, or some like do we see a lot of regulatory update coming in this industry as far as kind of what you see on a regular cycle? I mean, it's from the financial world of where I deal in alternative assets and IRAs and retirement plans. I mean, it's every 2 years we get some big block of legislation that we have to go, okay, cool, now let's figure all of this stuff out. But is there kind of a lot of ongoing legislative scrutiny? Maybe isn't the best word. That's the best one I can come up with, of just things that kind of come through the pipeline to continually either change the goalpost or stuff, or is it kind of again relatively minor changes that might come up a little bit less frequently when it comes to the regulatory landscape for people operating in the franchise space?
Alex, not a whole lot has changed over the 10, 12 years I've been doing this on that. I would say just the biggest one, which is the one everybody has a question on, how much I can make. And the reason that that's in there in the first place is because when the franchising first started, too many of the franchise development people said you make this much money if you get into this franchise, and they weren't. So the Federal Trade Commission stepped in and said, if you don't put it in your franchise disclosure document, you can't talk about it. When I first started, though, however, there was probably far less franchises that put earnings claims in their franchise disclosure documents. So 12 years ago, it was probably 50-50 on that, whether or not they'd have any earnings claims in their franchise disclosure documents at all. You generally got that information when you went through the process and talked to the franchisees, and the franchisor let the franchisees tell you, because in that conversation, franchisees can tell you anything. Existing franchisees can tell you anything they want about their business because it is their business, and they have that information on that. That one's fine. Over the years, over the last 10, 12 years I've been doing it, probably 90% of the franchisors now are putting in the earnings claims in their franchise disclosure documents. So that'd be the one big change that I've seen over the last 10 or 12 years. But other than that, everything stayed pretty close to the same. Maybe some minor things in there, but not a whole lot has changed.
Yeah, no, and that's definitely again one of those kind of interesting things that I think people would really find some value in. Is just it's, and transparency is a great thing, but at a certain point, it can overload people. You need to understand, what you need to put in there, what makes sense, what will actually help draw people into wanting to invest in your system versus, too much or too little. Again, you want to, kind of find that right balance. And I'm sure it probably changes from industry to industry of saying, hey, look, like, let's put in all this information because the people that generally gravitate towards this love, they're big type A, they want every single detail. Or some of them maybe again are a little bit less so to that fact. They're just for whatever reason it gravitates towards like, hey, just this is what they really like to see. But again, understanding that you can't talk about what's not in there is important. Now, I would say the second question to that is that are these documents kind of a living, breathing thing? Can you update a franchise agreement to then in turn be able to talk about something or claw something back if you say, hey, look, we'd rather keep this out of that agreement? Is there any changes that can be made to this stuff?
So franchise disclosure documents are living, breathing things on there, they're never changed because for any individual potential franchisee, because if you change it for one, you have to change the whole thing. You can't just change part of it. So that's set in stone. There's no moving that one around. Franchise agreement is kind of semi. No, actually, that one's pretty much set in stone as well. So the franchise agreement's not going to be changed. The franchisors really want every single franchisee to be on the same playing field on that. So this is not like the corporate world where, when I went in there, I could negotiate my salary, I can negotiate my days off. If I went into a new company, I can negotiate lots of stuff. And they had the whole HR team keeping track of all the different, everybody's different. Everybody's not different out in the franchising world. Everybody is the same on the same playing field. Now, there are certain things you can do, but you're going to be putting in an addendum to it. What is what's going to happen on that? So there may be a few things that you can change on there. That's where a good franchise attorney comes into play. And I work with a few of them on that. I would say the one thing that was interesting that we actually worked with a franchise attorney on that we actually got changed in the franchise agreement was I had one franchise that was offering franchises, and in the franchise agreement they had the franchise fee and the territory fee. So for each territory, they charged a franchise fee and a territory fee. And the franchise attorney said, you're going to have to reword that. You're going to have to change that because they're only investing in one franchise. So you can't have a different franchise fee every time you have a territory. You can't add that on because there's only one franchise. Now, you can have a different territory fee, obviously, because you got more territories, you invest in those. So my franchise attorney saved my client quite a few dollars by saying, that's not right. You got to change that. And they ended up changing that franchise agreement to do that. They eventually, but for that particular agreement, they just put an addendum in there for it on there. So there are certain things that can be changed. There can be have an addendum added to the franchise agreement on that. Territories are one thing. They may add a few more, zip codes to you. So that's one thing that can be negotiated. And there's a couple other things that can be. Some things can be negotiated in there, but they will add an addendum to it. They will not specifically change that franchise agreement at all.
Great. Now, to kind of bring this in for a well-rounded kind of examination of the beginning franchise, franchisor from initial concept to development to again legal oversight, things like that. What I'd really like to ask you is, obviously when things ideally hopefully get to a critical mass and it really kind of starts to develop itself, which again, I think every person with this idea really, wants to have that, where it's recognizable. People come to you for wanting to develop this, and then you can kind of sift through and say, hey, look, this person looks great, this person maybe not, and you can kind of just, have it kind of, again, growing itself. Where are some places that people, falter, right? It's, you've gotten through all of this, you get the franchise agreement, you've started doing it. What are some, again, places where once it gets to this point and you have a couple franchises, you've actually kind of started the ball rolling down the hill to try to get to that critical mass, where do you see people kind of falter in this? Because it's always important, it's great to look at what could be, but you need to know where the potholes are. You need to know where those landmines are to avoid them. So where do you kind of see people have maybe less success or maybe struggle? Maybe it's not something where it, grenades the whole thing, but maybe they had, a little bit more of a more arduous process because of some things that were done that could have been avoided.
The biggest thing, Alex, I see is when we have the emerging and developing franchises out there that do have a great idea, that came up with something really new and different, and they get a lot of interest right up front. The biggest issue that we run into is when they award too many franchises too fast and don't grow their team commensurate with the number of franchisees that they've sold. So those are red flags. When I see that, we've got 50 franchisees and then we've got 150 in development. It's, maybe you should just, back off on that, slow that down, wait. When you get to that critical mass, it's probably best to just hold off on issuing any more new franchisees on that until you've had a chance to open up the ones that you have on there. So whenever you start growing like that and you start growing fast, you've got the number of franchisees that you got, but you need that number of employees or support people that are going to help those franchises get them built up. mentor them, get them opened up, and help them grow on that. That is the number one concern that franchise consultants that we see and that we look at, is that they do have that critical mass in there to help develop those franchises. And quite a few of the franchisees that we worked with have done just that. If they get too many, where they've issued, they've awarded so many different franchises, they'll just stop and they'll say, we're not going to, bring in any new franchisees. We're going to work with the ones we have, develop our team to bring up those franchises until they're up and running. Once everybody gets up, we'll start again. So that's something to think about as a franchisor, is that you've got to have that support team in place to help out the franchisees. You've got to balance that out.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason that people are coming into the franchise model, is the support that they get from the the franchise that sits at the top of, hey, help me create a successful business. These people aren't going to pay you tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in franchising fees and agreements if they don't have the realistic expectation of that support to be successful. Some people do like piles of money on fire, but again, I think from this perspective, they have a vested interest, obviously, in being successful with this. But I would also imagine kind of something that leads into that, again, having great support. And it doesn't matter if you're doing my job or anywhere else, like, this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. You'll be more successful the more support you have to do better in your job, whether that's as a franchisee or whether that's as folding clothes at Dillard's. Having a support system will make anyone a more effective and more profitable in what they do. But one thing I would imagine also kind of comes to light in this whole process is that, you don't know what you don't know. You've developed this franchise in a certain place, but, going out, you might find things that are harder for you that you didn't realize, depending on the franchise model, whether it's, of how, are you, is it corporately owned real estate with leasebacks on build outs? Is it, whatever these things happen to be, you'll find areas that maybe you didn't know were as much of a problem. And especially in different localities, like, you'll find these things as you go along. And if you grow too far too fast, you might, get a critical mass of adoption, but you also might get a critical mass of problems, of things that come in. And I would imagine, again, don't like to speak for anyone, but critical mass of problems is not something that anyone, whether it's your personal life or whether it's your business, that you probably like to avoid. So again, it's, finding those problems, growing too fast. And that's what I kind of like about this, is it's all, relatively easy things to understand. You don't need to have advanced degrees from MIT and engineering to figure out, okay, well, people generally understand business. You need to have a product, you need to have support, you need to have revenue, you need to have leadership, and you need to have, again, a product that can be consumed on, whether that's a service, whether that's a good, whether that's whatever it is, of figuring that out. So that's kind of what I like a lot about franchising, is it offers the people, again, easy to understand things that, the concept is easy, the implementation is going to be hard. Which again, those are really great opportunities. Again, things shouldn't be necessarily, cheap and easy, from the perspective of, okay, it's like easy to do, easy to maintain and operate, easy to understand. There needs to be some difficulty in there that helps to build those calluses in the business, right? So again, from that perspective, anything that we've kind of missed on the new franchise development side of things, again, I like the simplicity of it, but I'm sure there's a lot of devil in the details here. Anything that you kind of feel like is a good salient point for people to take away from this conversation that we might have glanced over?
Yeah, there's one last thing, Alex, that we can go over. So you got your franchise agreement done. Sorry, you got your franchise disclosure document done. You became a franchise. One last thing to think about is, who are you going to offer that franchise to on there, and how fast do you want to grow on that one? So quite often, most of the franchises, when they start out, not all of them, but they'll start offering it to friends, family, customers that I've dealt with before. So that's where they grow out from their location, and they grow out there because other of those people that have already worked with them, done their services, ate at their restaurant, drank their beer, whatever it is, they already know them in that area. That's how they grow out. So think about how you're going to grow your franchise system. If you want to grow it quickly, then you're going to need a franchise development team on that. So there's a couple different ways to go about offering your franchise. One is just organically, where you put it out on your website. You tell your friends and family and your customers that you're going to do it. You can start advertising on different franchise websites. We have franchise development teams, people, company that does that. Frandevco, Ruppum Group, Franchise Fastlane. They'll take over that for you for a price, but they'll take over that for you. So think about how fast you want to grow and what do you want to spend on the advertising marketing? Who do you want to do that with? There's organizations like the one I belong to, IFPG, that can help you grow your business as well. Many different things to think about. So as a new franchisor, think about how fast you want to grow. If you want to pay the money, you can grow just about as fast as you want to on that one, or you can keep it organically, do it all yourself. But eventually you're going to need a team that's going to help you do that. You don't want to be taking the potential franchisees through that process yourself forever. Eventually you want a team to do it for you. So think about, after you become a franchise, how do I want to grow this and how fast do I want to grow it?
No, absolutely. I think that's a very kind of good place to bring everything in for a landing. It's again been great talking with you and being able to have this kind of platform where I've gotten to learn so much more about franchising. It's something, in my career, I've, gotten exposed to a lot of really interesting stuff on the investment side of things by being involved in non-traditional assets and retirement plans and pensions and stuff that I like the cool, new, interesting stuff. But for something as as established and, old, I mean, it's the best kind of way to describe franchising as a concept. It's been around for a really long time. Has been really fascinating to me. Again, kind of getting to talk to all different parts of it, from the initial development to investing in them, what that looks like. And now again, from the perspective of someone that has a business concept that wants to develop it into a franchise, again, I find absolutely fascinating. So if people want to get in touch with you, I know you do consulting on this with Franchise Maven. How can they get in touch with you and get some more information if they are interested in engaging with you?
Alex, they can just go to my website, franchisemaven.com. That's franchise, M-A-V as in Victor, E-N.com. Email me at greg@franchisemaven.com, or just pick up the phone and give me a call at 361-772-6401.
All right. Thank you so much, Greg. Really appreciate it. One of the most valuable resources we all have is our time, and I appreciate you taking the hour out to talk with us and our audience today. With that said, my name is Alex Perny. This is the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Thanks for joining with us, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for tuning in to the Alternative Investing Advantage podcast. Tune in next week for more investing tips and strategies.
Want to hear more episodes of the Alternative Investing Advantage? Search podcast at advantaira.com and subscribe.